Hello. Uh, it's really warm today. It's 50 degrees outside. And what a nice background here at the boat harbor. Last time we read, it was Eddie's birthday, and Mr. Nathanson knocked on the door, and there was a problem with Eddie's father. Something that we're going to notice, although it's not pointed out very well, or not very well, it's the wrong word, it's not pointed out very strongly, is that even when we have contentious relationships, parent and child, when bad things happen, it tends to intensify or bring things back together. Anyway, we'll see if that happens or not. It's just something I thought I would say. I am Ruby. It suddenly made sense to Eddie why the woman looked familiar. He'd seen a photograph somewhere in the back of the repair shop among the old manuals and paperwork from the park's initial ownership. The old entrance, Eddie said. She nodded in satisfaction. The original Ruby Pier entrance had been something of a landmark, a giant arching structure based on a historic French temple with fluted columns and a cove dome at the top. Just beneath that dome, under which all patrons would pass, was the painted face of a beautiful woman. This woman, Ruby. But that thing was destroyed a long time ago, Eddie said. There was a big... He paused. Fire, the old woman said. Yes, a very big fire. She dropped her chin, and her eyes looked down through her spectacles as if she were reading from her lap. It was Independence Day, the 4th of July, a holiday. Emile loved holidays. Good for business, he'd say. If Independence Day went well, the entire summer might go well. So Emile arranged for fireworks. He brought in a marching band. He even hired extra workers, roustabouts mostly, just for the weekend. But something happened the night before the celebration. It was hot, even after the sun went down, and a few of the roustabouts chose to sleep outside behind the work sheds. They lit a fire in a metal barrel to roast their food. As the night went on, there was drinking and carousing. The workers got a hold of some of the smaller fireworks. They set them off. The wind blew. The sparks flew. Everything in those days was made of lath and tar. Lath. L-A-T-H-E. What is lath? Somebody find that out. She shook her head. The rest happened quickly. The fire spread to the midway and the food stalls and on to the animal cages. The roustabouts ran off. By the time someone came to our home to wake us, Ruby Pier was in flames. From our window we saw the horrible orange blaze. We heard the horses' hooves and the steamer engines of the fire companies. People were in the street. I begged Emile not to go, but that was fruitless. Of course he would go. He would go to the raging fire, and he would try to salvage his years of work, and he would lose himself in anger and fear, and when the entrance caught fire, the entrance with my name and my picture, he lost all sense of where he was, too. He was trying to throw buckets of water when a column collapsed upon him. She put her fingers together and raised them to her lips. In the course of one night, our lives were changed forever. Risk-taker that he was, Emile had acquired only minimal insurance for the pier. He lost his fortune. His splendid gift to me was gone. In desperation, he sold the charred grounds to a businessman from Pennsylvania for far less than it was worth. That businessman kept the name, Ruby Pier, and in time he reopened the park, but it was not ours anymore. Emile's spirit was as broken as his body. It took 3 years before he could walk on his own. We moved away to a place outside the city, a small flat where our lives were spent modestly, me tending to my wounded husband and silently nurturing a single wish. She stopped. What wish? Eddie said. That he had never built that place. The old woman sat in silence. Eddie studied the vast jade sky. He thought about how many times he'd wished the same thing, that whoever had built Ruby Pier had done something else with his money. "I'm sorry about your husband," Eddie said, mostly because he didn't know what else to say. The old woman smiled. "Thank you, dear, but we lived many years beyond those flames. We raised 3 children. Eddie was sickly, in and out of the hospital. He left me a widow in my 50s. You see this face? These wrinkles?" She turned her cheeks upward. "I earned every one of them." Eddie frowned. "I don't understand. Did we ever meet? Did you ever come to the pier?" "No," she said. "I never wanted to see the pier again. My children went there, and their children, and theirs, but not me. The idea of heaven was as far from the ocean as possible, back in that busy diner when my days were simple, when Emile was courting me." Eddie rubbed his temples. When he breathed, mist emerged. "So why am I here?" he said. "I mean, your story, the fire, it all happened before I was born." "Things that happen before you are born still affect you," she said. "And people who come before your time affect you as well. We move through places every day that would never have been if not for those who came before us. Our workplaces, where we spend so much of time, we often think they began with our arrival, but that is not true." She tapped her fingers together. "If not for Emile, I would have no husband. If not for our marriage, there would be no pier. If there had been no pier, you would not have ended up working there." Eddie scratched his head. "So, you're here to tell me about work?" "No, dear," Ruby answered, her voice softening. "I'm here to tell you why your father died." The phone call was from Eddie's mother. His father had collapsed that afternoon on the east end of the boardwalk near the junior rocket ride. He had a raging fever. "Eddie, I'm afraid," his mother said, her voice shaking. She told him of a night earlier in the week when his father had come home at dawn soaking wet. His clothes were full of sand. He was missing a shoe. She said he smelled like the ocean. Eddie bet he smelled like liquor, too. "He was coughing," his mother explained. "It just got worse. We should have called a doctor right away." She drifted in her words. "He'd gone to work that day," she said, sick as he was, with his tool belt and ball-peen hammer, same as always. But that night he refused to eat, and in bed he'd hacked and wheezed and sweated through his undershirt. The next day was worse, and now, this afternoon, he'd collapsed. "The doctor said it's pneumonia. Oh, I should have done something. I should have done something." "What are you supposed to do?" Eddie asked. He was mad that she took this on herself. It was his father's drunken fault. Through the phone, he heard her crying. Eddie's father used to say he'd spent so many years by the ocean he breathed the seawater. And now, away from that ocean in the confines of a hospital bed, his body began to wither like a beached fish. Complications developed. Congestion built in his chest. His condition went from fair to stable, from stable to serious. Friends went from saying, "He'll be home in a day," to "He'll be home in a week. In his father's absence, Eddie helped out at the pier, working evenings after his taxi job, greasing the tracks, checking the brake pads, testing the levers, even repairing broken ride parts in the shop. What he really was doing was protecting his father's job. The owners acknowledged his efforts, then paid him half of what his father earned. He gave the money to his mother, who went to the hospital every day and slept there most nights. Eddie and Marguerite cleaned her apartment and shopped for food. So, Mitch Albom said he based the book on his uncle, who felt like his life never mattered. And we see here that Eddie falling into this pit, I guess, of my life never mattered. And we know that he wanted to be an engineer, but that went away. And again, we go back to Drums, Girls, and Dangerous Pie, the 5 stages of grief and loss. And we see in Eddie the loss of life, even when he was alive. We see denial, we see anger, we see bargaining, we see depression, and we never ever see him have acceptance. And we hear, and we're hoping that here in heaven he's going to find that acceptance, that his life did have meaning and it did have value. It is really nice outside. Oh my gosh.